I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the supernatural, but what happened to me at St. Mary's Chapel changed my perspective forever. I'll never forget that night, and every time I recount the story, it feels like I'm reliving it. Started as a dare. My friends and I, a group of thrill-seeking college students, had heard the rumors about St. Mary's Chapel. Built in the 1800s, it had been abandoned for decades. Locals whispered about strange noises and ghostly apparitions, but we dismissed them as nothing more than spooky tales to keep kids away. One crisp autumn night, we decided to investigate for ourselves. The chapel stood isolated on the outskirts of town, surrounded by an overgrown cemetery. The moon cast an eerie glow on the weathered stone walls, and the wind howled through the trees, creating an unsettling soundtrack for our adventure. Armed with flashlights and a healthy dose of bravado, we made our way inside. The air inside the chapel was thick with dust and the scent of decay. Our footsteps echoed off the walls as we walked down the main aisle, our flashlights casting long shadows. The pews, once neatly arranged, were now scattered and broken. The altar, draped in cobwebs, stood as a solemn reminder of the building's forgotten past. As we explored, we exchanged nervous laughter and whispered jokes to lighten the mood. But then, something changed. The air grew colder, and an oppressive silence fell over us. My flashlight flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, I saw her. She stood at the altar, a ghostly figure in a tattered wedding dress, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. My heart raced as I tried to process what I was seeing. I blinked, and she was gone. "Did you see that?" I whispered to my friends, my voice trembling. "See what?" they replied, their expressions a mix of confusion and fear. I didn't want to seem crazy, so I shrugged it off, blaming it on my imagination. We continued our exploration, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As we reached the back of the chapel, we found a door leading to the basement. It creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. My friends dared me to go first, and, trying to maintain my bravado, I reluctantly agreed. The basement was even colder than the chapel above. The walls were lined with old, rusted tools and remnants of forgotten rituals. My flashlight beam danced across the room, and that's when I saw them, dozens of flickering candles arranged in a circle, surrounding a makeshift altar. The air was heavy with the scent of burning wax and something else, something foul. A sudden sense of dread washed over me. I turned to leave, but the basement door slammed shut, trapping us inside. Panic set in as we pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. Then, we heard it, a low, guttural chant echoing through the room. The candles flickered wildly, casting sinister shadows on the walls. My friends and I huddled together, our eyes darting around in terror. The chant grew louder, more insistent, and then we saw her again. The bride. She floated above the altar, her face twisted in anguish. She pointed at us, and in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, she screamed, "Leave this place!" We didn't need to be told twice. With a surge of adrenaline, we managed to force the door open and scramble up the stairs. We ran from the chapel, not stopping until we were safely outside. The air felt lighter, and the oppressive feeling lifted. We never spoke of that night again, and none of us ever returned to St. Mary's Chapel. The experience left a mark on us all, a chilling reminder that some places are better left undisturbed. Even now, years later, I can still hear her scream echoing in my mind, a haunting memory that will never fade. Months after our harrowing encounter, I found myself unable to shake the lingering sense of dread. My dreams were plagued by the vision of the bride and the sound of her scream. I decided to delve deeper into the history of St. Mary's Chapel, hoping to find some explanation for what we had witnessed. I visited the town's library, poring over old records and newspaper articles. What I discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The chapel had been the site of a tragic wedding in the late 1800s. The bride, Mary Davenport, had been left at the altar by her fiancé, who had mysteriously disappeared on the day of their wedding. Heartbroken, Mary had taken her own life in the very chapel where she was to be married. Since then, There had been numerous reports of ghostly sightings and unexplained phenomena. I shared my findings with my friends, but most of them dismissed it as mere coincidence. However, one of them, Sarah, was visibly shaken. She confessed that she had also seen the bride that night but had been too scared to admit it. Her admission validated my own experience and deepened my resolve to understand what had happened. Despite our mutual fear, Sarah and I decided to return to the chapel, determined to find closure. Armed with more knowledge and a newfound respect for the supernatural, we approached the chapel with a mix of trepidation and resolve. As we stepped inside, the familiar scent of decay and the oppressive silence greeted us. We made our way to the altar, where I had first seen the bride. This time, we came prepared with offerings, flowers, and a small candle, hoping to appease her restless spirit. We placed the offerings on the altar and lit the candle. As its flame flickered, a sudden gust of wind blew through the chapel, extinguishing it. We heard a soft, mournful wail echoing through the halls. Sarah clutched my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Mary," I called out, my voice trembling. "We're sorry for what happened to you. We hope you find peace." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a cold breeze swept past us, and we saw her again. The bride appeared at the altar, her eyes no longer hollow but filled with a deep sadness. She looked at us, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something else, gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. With that, she faded away, and the oppressive feeling lifted once more. Sarah and I left the chapel, our hearts heavy but our spirits lighter. We had finally found some measure of closure. Years have passed since that night, but the memory of St. Mary's Chapel remains vivid. It taught me that some places carry the weight of their past, and some spirits are bound by their sorrow. While I still consider myself a skeptic, I now approach the supernatural with a sense of respect and an open mind. The experience at St. Mary's Chapel is a reminder that there are things in this world that defy explanation, and sometimes, the only way to find peace is to confront them head-on.